Lynette and her husband, Brian Hooker, the two of them had set sail in their retirement and were living on a boat called Soulmate. And they were sailing in the Bahamas. The boat was moored. They had used a tender, one of those little rubberized 8-foot dinghies, to go to shore and go to a restaurant. And as they were coming back, Brian told the police that Lynette just bounced out and she had the key and the engine wouldn't work without her and the current took her away, and that was that.
She was at a pool bar, drinks in hand, sun going down over the water. The kind of evening that looks beautiful in a photograph and means nothing until it means everything. Her name was Lynette Hooker. She was 53 years old. She had sailed from Michigan to Texas to Florida to the Bahamas on a used sailboat she and her husband had spent a year rebuilding with their own hands. She had given up her career for this life. She had sold her house for this life. She had packed everything she owned into a vessel named Soulmate and pointed it toward open water. And on the evening of April 3rd, 2026, she was sitting at a pool bar on Elbow Cay in the Abaco Islands of the Bahamas. And a bartender named Ken was watching her husband order 2 rum and cokes. Ken is 38 years old. He is Bahamian. He knows Elbow Cay the way you know the house you grew up in. Every corner, every regular face, every stranger who walks through the door and doesn't quite fit. Ken noticed Brian Hooker the way you notice someone who is too still in a room that is moving. He noticed the tattoos. He noticed the height. He noticed that this man said almost nothing and paid by card, and reminded him, he would later tell the New York Post, of an old war veteran. Ken did not notice anything wrong. Nobody did. By the following evening, Lynette Hooker would be gone, and the only person who knows exactly what happened between that pool bar and the moment she went into the water is the man who ordered 2 rum and cokes and said almost nothing and paid by card, and has not, since the moment he paddled his dinghy into Marsh Harbor and reported his wife missing, offered the world a version of events that satisfies a single person who has looked at this case carefully. That man is Brian Hooker, former United States Marine, Union leader, husband of 25 years. The last person to see Lynette Hooker alive. Here is what we know. Here is what the detective knows. And here is what is inside the folder that changed the direction of this entire investigation. The Abaco Inn sits on Elbow Cay, a sliver of an island in the Bahamas that is about 1.5 miles long and surrounded by water so clear you can see the bottom from 30 feet up. It is the kind of place people come to disappear from their lives in the good sense of the word, to leave behind everything that was heavy and float for a while. Brian and Lynette Hooker arrived at the pool bar around 4:30 in the afternoon on Friday, April 3rd, 2026. Lynette went to the pool first. Brian ordered. Ken the bartender watched. 2 rum and cokes. Card payment. Silence. What happened at that bar that evening has been described by Ken to the New York Post and referenced across multiple outlets covering this case. What is known is that the couple was there. What is known is that they drank. What is known is that they left. What is known is that sometime after they returned to their dinghy, the small inflatable boat they used to travel between their anchored sailboat and the shore, Lynette Hooker went into the water. Brian Hooker's account, as reported by investigators and referenced in coverage by Reuters, ABC News, and local Bahamian media, is that a current took her. A current. He did not say he jumped in after her. He did not say he dropped anchor and searched. He did not describe a frantic swim or a desperate dive or a cry for help that brought other boats alongside. He paddled his dinghy into Marsh Harbor. He reported his wife missing. He said a current took her. The Royal Bahamas Police Force began their investigation that night. By Wednesday, April 8th, 4 days after Lynette disappeared, they had seen enough to take Brian Hooker into custody. Assistant Commissioner Eduardo Damies confirmed the arrest to Reuters and stated it was based on probable cause. 4 days. In an investigation, 4 days from disappearance to arrest is not a long time. It is actually extraordinarily fast, which means that what the Royal Bahamas Police Force found in those 4 days was not ambiguous. It was not borderline. It was enough. Enough of a pattern, enough of a record, enough of a reason that a Bahamian magistrate signed off on detention. The question is what they found. The answer begins not on a boat in the Bahamas, but in a house in Kentwood, Michigan, where two people lived for years and where, on at least two documented occasions, someone decided that what was happening inside those walls was bad enough to call the police. Kentwood is a city in Kent County, Michigan, just south of Grand Rapids. It is a place of quiet streets and mid-range homes and the kind of neighborhood where people know each other by sight, if not by name. Brian and Lynette Hooker lived there for years. Their home sat in a residential area and had neighbors on both sides and police records that tell a story the neighbors only saw the edges of. Wood TV News 8, the Grand Rapids NBC affiliate, reviewed Kentwood police records and reported that officers were called to the Hooker residence at least twice over the course of a decade. Two documented occasions, two times when someone, a neighbor, a spouse, someone inside the house, decided that what was happening was bad enough to bring a uniformed officer to the door. Those records are not sealed. They are not rumor. They are not the product of a daughter's memory or a mother's grief. They are the records the Kent County Police Department turned over when the station asked. Two calls, over a decade. Now consider how many things happen in a decade inside a house that nobody calls about. Consider how bad something has to get before a person picks up the phone and dials. Consider how many times it didn't get that bad, or how many times it did and the phone stayed on the table. Two calls is not a confession. Two calls is not a conviction. Two calls is a pattern. And a pattern is what a detective in Grand Bahama was building when he opened the first folder on his desk and started to read. Underneath the Wood TV report in that folder is a statement from Darlene Hamlet. Darlene Hamlet is Lynette Hooker's mother. She is in her 70s. She owns a lakefront home in Sand Lake, Lena County, Michigan, a property that Lena County records show has been in her name and the name of William E. Hamlet Jr. since 2003. She has never sold it. She has never transferred it. She has held it for over 20 years, the way some people hold things, quietly, stubbornly, without explanation, as though they always knew they might need it. Darlene gave an interview to ABC News after her daughter disappeared. She said she hoped the investigation would find the truth. She also said that her daughter's marriage was volatile. That is the word she used, volatile, on the record, on camera, to a national network, a mother describing her daughter's 25-year marriage with a single word, the kind of word you do not choose casually, the kind of word that carries a weight of witnessed moments behind it. Volatile, not difficult, not rocky, not complicated, volatile. Darlene Hamlet watched her daughter's marriage for 25 years, and when the cameras came and asked her how to describe it, that is the word she reached for. And then there is Carly. Carly Allisworth is Lynette Hooker's daughter from a previous relationship. Brian Hooker is her stepfather. She lives in Lowell, Michigan, which is a small city about 15 miles east of Grand Rapids, a place of old buildings and river views and a community that knows its own. Carly has given extended on-camera interviews to 6 news outlets since her mother disappeared. Not 1, not 2, 6. Wood TV 8, ABC News, NBC News, CBS News, CNN, News Nation. She has told the same story in every single one of them. The same facts, the same timeline, the same questions, delivered with the same unwavering consistency that either means a person is telling the truth or has rehearsed a lie so many times it has become indistinguishable from truth. And everything else about this case points toward the former. In every interview, Carly returns to the same problem. She calls it arithmetic. Her mother was an experienced sailor. Lynette Hooker was not a woman who stumbled onto a boat for the first time in her 50s. She had sailed. She knew the water. She understood the mechanics of a dinghy, the behavior of currents, the protocols of man-overboard situations. She was not a passenger. She was a sailor. Her stepfather, Brian, is a former United States Marine. The United States Marine Corps does not produce men who are unfamiliar with the water. It produces men who are trained in amphibious operations, water survival, and the kind of physical response to emergency that bypasses panic and goes directly to action. A Marine who sees someone go overboard does not sit in the dinghy and watch the current take them. A Marine drops anchor. A Marine dives. A Marine turns the vessel around. None of those things happened. Brian Hooker paddled to shore. He reported his wife missing. He said a current took her. Carly has laid this out in every interview, in exactly those terms, with exactly that logic, and she has never been successfully challenged on the arithmetic. Because the arithmetic is not complicated. A current took an experienced sailor from a small dinghy in the presence of a Marine who had every physical capability to act, and the Marine paddled to shore. Carly used the word rocky to Wood TV 8. She used her grandmother's word, volatile, to NBC. To other outlets, she described a history of not getting along, especially when they drank. She was careful. She was specific. She did not use language that went beyond what she could personally observe or confirm. And then there is the 2006 case. In 2006, Brian Hooker faced a child abuse charge in Michigan. Both People magazine and NBC News reported it. The charge involved an allegation that Brian had choked a child, his daughter, Carly's sister. Carly said she witnessed the incident. She testified in court. The jury acquitted him. Not guilty. The verdict was delivered and the record reflects it. And that fact must be stated clearly and completely because the law is the law and a not guilty verdict is not a technicality and it is not something to be minimized or slid past in the interest of building a narrative. Brian Hooker was charged. Brian H. Hooker was tried. Brian Hooker was acquitted. And Carly Ellsworth watched all of it happen, and then she watched her mother go back to him, and then she watched her mother disappear from a boat in the Bahamas, and she has been sitting in front of cameras ever since, telling the same story, asking the same question, why didn't he swim? That question does not have an answer in the public record. Brian Hooker has not given a detailed public account of what happened on that dinghy. His explanation, a current took her, is what investigators have to work with alongside everything else they have gathered in the weeks since April 4th. But the question is there. It has been asked by Carly in 6 separate interviews. It has been asked by every journalist who has looked at this case. It is sitting in the detective's folder underneath the Kentwood police records and above Darlene's word, volatile, and it is getting heavier the more you look at it. In January 2024, Lynette Hooker left the boat. She left Brian. She packed what she had and she went to her mother's house, Darlene's lakefront home in Sand Lake, the one that had been in Darlene's name since 2003, the one that was never part of Brian and Lynette's shared financial life, the one that was always just Darlene's. And she sat in that house and she picked up her phone and she typed a message to Marn Stevenson. Marn Stevenson is not a journalist. She is not a family member. She is not a therapist or a lawyer or a professional who was paid to listen. She is a sailor. She and her husband Blaine met Brian and Lynette Hooker in late 2023 while both couples were sailing through Florida. They anchored near each other. They shared meals and sunsets and the easy shorthand that develops between people living the same unconventional life. Blaine told News Nation that they had been boating with the Hookers for a while. By January 2024, that friendship was about to receive a message that Marn would still be holding 2 years later when her friend went missing. CBS News. Miami correspondent Christian Benitez obtained the text messages directly from Marn and confirmed their authenticity. These are not leaked documents. These are not secondhand accounts. These are the words Lynette Hooker chose in her own voice addressed to the only person she was willing to tell. Here is what she told Marn. She told her she had quit her awesome career to cruise. She told her she had sold her house to cruise. She told her she had given away everything she owned to cruise. She said she had bet her entire life on the water and on this marriage and that after 6 weeks of actually living it, the marriage had ended. A 21-year marriage, 6 weeks on the water, done. She said she was not going back. Marn pressed her, gently the way a good friend does. She asked if there was any chance of reconciliation. Could they work it out? Was there anything left? Lynette's reply came in 2 parts. The first was 4 words. It was real bad. The second was 6. I can't be out there with him. Read those words carefully, not with the knowledge of what happened later. Just read them for what they are. A woman in her early 50s, sitting in her mother's house, telling a friend that her marriage was real bad and that she could not be on a boat in the ocean alone with the man she had been married to for 21 years. Out there is not a figure of speech. It is not an abstraction. Out there is the Gulf of Mexico. Out there is the Atlantic. Out there is a 40-foot sailboat with 2 people aboard, and no other witnesses, and no neighbors to call, and no police record that can reach you, and nothing between you and the horizon but water. Lynette Hooker knew exactly what out there meant. She had lived it. She had sailed it. She had spent months on the water with Brian Hooker, and she was now sitting in her mother's house saying in plain language that she could not go back. She did not file a police report. She did not go to a lawyer. She did not call a domestic violence hotline. She texted a fellow sailor who had known her for a few months, and she used the most compressed, unembellished language available. Real bad, can't be out there. And she asked for nothing except to be heard. Marn heard her, and Marn kept what she wrote. For 2 years, Marn Stevenson kept those messages on her phone. She did not delete them. She did not forward them to anyone. She held on to them the way you hold on to something you are not sure you will ever need, but are not willing to lose. And when Lynette disappeared from a boat in the Bahamas in April 2026, Marn picked up the phone and she called CBS News and she handed over everything Lynette had ever written to her. Because that is what Marn could do. That was the only thing left she could do for her friend. Blaine Stevenson gave an interview to News Nation. He described Brian as a former Marine, a union leader, a man who had fought for other people's rights. He said he was asking Brian to be that person now, the person who fights, who stands up, who does not walk away. There was grief in that statement. There was also something harder underneath it, the grief of a man who likes someone and is now looking at everything they know about that person from a different angle. Marn gave her own interview separately. She was asked about Brian's decision to leave the Bahamas while Lynette was still missing, while the search was still active, while there was still technically a possibility that she might be found alive. Marn used one word: disgusting, not confused, not heartbreaking, not understandable given the circumstances. Disgusting. That is the word a person uses when they have made a moral judgment and they are not interested in softening it. The man Brian Hooker was, before this case goes any further, Brian Hooker deserves to be described accurately and completely, not because it changes the weight of the evidence, but because the truth requires it, and because the distance between who a person appears to be and what the record shows is sometimes the most important part of the story. Brian Hooker is a former United States Marine. He served his country. That service is on the record and it is real, and it carries a weight that should not be dismissed. The Marine Corps produces disciplined, physically capable, tactically trained men and women, and Brian Hooker was one of them. Brian Hooker was also a union leader. Blaine Stevenson described him as a staunch person of the people, a man who fought publicly for workers' rights, who showed up when it mattered, who put himself in front of a cause and pushed. That is not a performance. That is a record. He was described by a former Kentwood neighbor who spoke to Fox News Digital as a man whose wife had a free spirit go with the flow, way about her. That neighbor had no idea, on the day they spoke to the press, that Lynette was already gone. The news hit them like news hits people who genuinely did not see it coming. John Waters, a friend who met Brian and Lynette at an oyster bar in Panama City Beach, Florida, told Fox News Digital that when the couple arrived in Texas and bought the sailboat, it was their new lifestyle. Waters watched them spend a year working on it, rebuilding it, refitting it, making it seaworthy. He said they were committed to it. He said it felt real. This is the Brian Hooker that people who knew him describe: a Marine, a union man, a husband who spent a year rebuilding a boat with his wife and named it Soulmate. And then there is the other record, the Kentwood police calls, confirmed by Wood TV8 through Kent County Police Department records. 2 calls, 1 decade. The 2006 child abuse charge, filed, tried, acquitted by jury, but filed and tried, and witnessed by Carly, who was a child at the time and who has been describing what she saw in court for nearly 20 years and has never changed her account. The word Darlene chose, volatile. The message Lynette sent, real bad. The arithmetic Carly keeps presenting, a Marine who did not swim. These 2 versions of Brian Hooker, the public man and the private record, are both real. They are not in competition. They are both true at the same time. which is the most uncomfortable kind of truth there is, because it means that nothing about how someone appears in the world tells you what happens in the places no one sees. Out there, on the water, with no witnesses, no cameras, no neighbors, and no police records. That is where the marriage that Lynette described as real bad actually lived. That is the version of Brian Hooker that only Lynette ever saw in full. And Lynette is gone. The sailboat called Soulmate. After the Kentwood home sold in 2020, Brian and Lynette Hooker went to Texas. Fox News Digital reviewed the property records and confirmed the Kentwood sale. Both names were on the deed. The house was sold jointly. The proceeds went to both of them. That is the reasonable inference from a joint sale, though the precise distribution of the funds has not been publicly confirmed. In Texas, they found a used sailboat. John Waters described the purchase and the year-long refit to Fox News Digital. The couple lived that project, stripping it down and rebuilding it, learning the boat the way you learn something you have committed your body and your savings to. They named it Soulmate. The Sailing Hookers YouTube channel launched in 2023. The channel header describes its premise directly. Follow us as we sail our new-to-us sailboat from Texas to Michigan. It is exactly what it sounds like. A couple who sold their house, bought a boat, rebuilt it from the inside out, and decided to document the journey. The channel accumulated subscribers and views. People do this kind of thing, and audiences follow because the premise is inherently romantic. The open water, the self-sufficiency, the leaving behind of everything ordinary. Multiple news outlets, in covering the disappearance, referred to the Soulmate as a yacht. The detective made a note of this. The distinction matters not for cosmetic reasons, but for financial ones. A yacht is a purchase. A sailboat that two people spend a year rebuilding is a project, a financial commitment, a shared labor, an asset whose value is not just monetary but bound up in sweat equity, in time, and the kind of investment that does not separate cleanly in a legal proceeding. If Lynette had filed for divorce in 2024, the boat would have been part of the negotiation. A jointly rebuilt vessel, sailed under a joint YouTube channel, purchased with the proceeds of a jointly sold home. The exact title registration of the Soulmate has not been publicly confirmed. But in a divorce, its character as a marital asset would almost certainly have been argued by both sides. In a death, the question of title resolves much more simply. By late 2023, Brian and Lynette were near Bradenton, Florida. That is where they crossed paths with Blaine and Marn Stevenson. By March 2026, they were in the Bahamas. Lynette's Instagram post on March 29, 2026, 6 days before she disappeared, described them at Marsh Harbor on the Sea of Abaco. The last upload on the YouTube channel, according to the Detroit News, was March 9, 2026. She was posting, she was filming, she was captioning sunsets and paddleboard clips and whatever version of the life they were presenting to the world. And then on April 3rd, she was at a pool bar. And on April 4th, she was gone. This is the part of the story that is hardest to sit with. In February 2024, Marn Stevenson sent Lynette a message, something to the effect of checking in, asking how she was, noting that things seemed to be looking up. Lynette's reply was heart emojis and a thumbs up. The reconciliation is documented in the text exchange that CBS News obtained and confirmed. She went back. The woman who had written in January 2024 that it was real bad, that she could not be out there with him, that she was done. By February or March of 2024, she was back on the boat, back with Brian, back to the life she had said she was leaving. The Instagram came back. The YouTube content resumed. The captions returned. The sunsets and the paddleboards and the version of the life that the world was allowed to see, all of it came back, clean and bright and framed like a story that had a rough chapter and then found its footing again. From the outside, it looked like a marriage that had survived. And here is where the story requires honesty rather than assumption. We do not know what Brian said to Lynette between January and March 2024. We do not know what conversations happened, what promises were made, what changed. We do not know whether Lynette went back because she wanted to believe it was different, or because she felt she had no choice, or because the mathematics of her situation, no house, no separate assets, no career to return to, made the boat feel like the only option she had. We do not know. What we know is that she told Marn in January that she was done, and that by February she was sending heart emojis, and that 25 months after those heart emojis, she was gone from a boat in the Bahamas with Brian Hooker as the only witness. Carly watched her mother go back. She said so publicly. She described watching it the way children of complicated marriages describe the specific helplessness of seeing a parent return to something frightening. There are no words for it. There is nothing to do. You love someone and you cannot protect them from the choices they make. Darlene watched her daughter go back. She had used the word volatile on camera. She kept her lake house in her own name. And she watched Lynette climb back onto the Soulmate and sail away. What do you say to someone you love when they return to something you are afraid of? In this case, apparently, you keep the door open. You keep the house in your name. You keep the key under the mat, and you wait. A good detective does not open the financial folder first. A good detective opens the relationship folder first, then the text, then the property. By the time the financial folder is on the desk, the detective already has a question they are trying to answer. The financial folder is where that question either gets answered or doesn't. The question in every marriage death investigation, in every jurisdiction, in every country, across every case of its kind, is the same question. It has been the same question since the first time a prosecutor stood up in a courtroom and tried to explain to a jury why one person would kill someone they had promised to love. The question is, how would the marriage have ended? There are two ways a marriage ends: divorce or death. Everything else is a variation on those two outcomes. In American family law, specifically under the principles that would govern a Michigan domiciled couple, the distribution of assets in a divorce follows a set of rules that are not secret. Separate property, assets brought into the marriage by one spouse, kept in that spouse's name, not commingled, generally goes back to the spouse who brought it. Marital property, jointly held assets, joint accounts, things built together during the marriage, gets divided. Now look at what Lynette Hooker had. In January 2024, in her own words confirmed by CBS News, she said she had sold her house to Cruz. She said she had given away everything she owned to Cruz. She said she had quit her awesome career, the career that had been building for years, the income, the professional identity. She had walked away from it to get on a boat with Brian Hooker. She had no separate property, no house in her name, no career generating income, or a pension accruing in her name alone. She had put everything she had, financially, professionally, personally, into a joint life on a jointly rebuilt sailboat. In a divorce, that is not an advantageous position. In a divorce, the spouse whose name is on more of the paperwork walks away with more of the life. The spouse who gave everything up, who gave up the career, the house, the separate financial identity, walks away with a share of what was built together, which in this case would largely mean a share of the Soulmate, a used sailboat they had rebuilt themselves. That is the primary marital asset the public record points to. In a death, none of that arithmetic applies. In a death absent a will that says otherwise, a surviving spouse inherits. The accounts continue under survivorship rules where they were set up that way. The boat passes to whoever holds the title. The financial life of the marriage resolves not through negotiation in court filings and attorneys, but through the simple, clean mechanism of loss. Now the detective opens the financial folder. On one page, confirmed through the investigation and reported in coverage of the case, is a life insurance policy, a policy taken out on Lynette Hooker's life, with a beneficiary named. A life insurance policy is not evidence of murder. This must be said and it must be meant. Millions of married couples hold life insurance policies on each other. It is responsible financial planning. It is what actuaries are paid to recommend and what financial advisors put in the column labeled prudent decisions. A life insurance policy by itself proves nothing, but a life insurance policy, in the context of everything else in the folder, the text in January 2024, the word volatile, the 2 Kentwood police calls, the arithmetic Carly keeps presenting, the reconciliation that brought a woman back to a place she said she could not be, the disappearance from a boat with one witness who did not swim. In that context, the policy is not just responsible financial planning. In that context, the policy is a number, and the number is a motive. The detective who has been working through these folders for hours, who underlined a word, who drew a line between two properties, who noted the distinction between a yacht and a sailboat, closes the financial folder and adds it to the stack. Brian Hooker was taken into custody on April 8, 2026, 4 days after Lynette disappeared. The Royal Bahamas Police Force, working with information that included the text messages Marn had kept, the family testimony from Carly and Darlene, the account from bartender Ken, and the financial records now confirmed to be part of the investigative file, had enough of a pattern that a magistrate signed off on detention. Probable cause, not a conviction, not a verdict. The beginning of a legal process, not the end of one. But the beginning of a legal process in a country that does not make arrests lightly, based on a pattern that begins with 2 police calls in Kentwood and ends with a life insurance policy in a folder in the Bahamas. Brian Hooker has not been convicted of anything. He was acquitted in 2006. He deserves the presumption of innocence that the law guarantees him. The case is ongoing. Evidence is still being gathered. Documents are still being processed. The financial records have not been fully released to the public. All of that is true. And also true is this. A woman named Lynette Hooker wrote to a friend in January 2024 that she could not be on a boat in the ocean with her husband. She said it was real bad. She went back anyway, and she has not come home. This is the part no folder answers. You can read every document. You can review the Kentwood police records and the CBS text messages and the Lena County property records and the life insurance policy and the probable cause affidavit and every article published by every outlet that has covered this case. You can follow the arithmetic Carly laid out in 6 separate interviews. You can listen to Darlene's word, volatile, until you understand every syllable of what she was carrying when she said it. None of it answers the question that this case actually lives inside of. The question is not whether something was wrong in the marriage. The texts answer that. The question is not whether Brian Hooker had a financial motive. The insurance policy and the asset distribution answer that. The question is not even why Lynette went back in February 2024. We may never fully know the answer to that one. The question, the one that keeps this case from being just another entry in the archive of terrible things that happen between people who promise to love each other, is simpler and harder than all of those. Lynette Hooker told someone. She told Marn in January 2024, in writing, confirmed by CBS, kept on a phone for 2 years. She said it was real bad. She said she could not be out there with him. She reached out to a person she had known for only a few months, and she told that person the truth in the clearest, most direct language available to her, and then no one stopped her from going back. This is not an accusation against Marn Stevenson. Marn kept the messages. Marn came forward. Marn gave the interview. Marn used the word disgusting when she described Brian leaving the Bahamas while the search was still on. Marn did everything a person can do after the fact. This is not an accusation against Darlene. Darlene kept her house. Darlene kept her door open. Darlene used the right word on camera when the cameras came. Darlene is sitting in Sand Lake right now, in a house by a lake, waiting for news that may never come in the form she needs it. This is not an accusation against Carly. Carly testified in court as a child. Carly has given 6 interviews as an adult. Carly is still giving them. Carly is doing the only thing available to her, which is to keep telling the truth in public until someone does something with it. This is just what happens. This is the gap that exists between a woman saying, I can't be out there with him, and the world having any mechanism to hold that in place and act on it before something happens. The texts were private. The feelings were private. The marriage was private. What happened out there was private in the most absolute sense of the word. 2 people, open ocean, no witnesses, no record except the one that ended when one of them didn't come back. The last YouTube upload was March 9th, 2026. The last Instagram post was March 29th. Lynette was posting sunsets and captioning the life the world was allowed to see, right up until she couldn't anymore. Carly is still talking to cameras. Darlene is still waiting by her lake. Marn is still carrying what Lynette wrote. The detective in Grand Bahama is still working through the folders, And Brian Hooker is in custody on probable cause in the Bahamas, with a case still being built around him and a verdict that has not yet been reached and a legal process that is only in its earliest stages. There is no resolution to offer here. The case is open. The body has not been found. The full financial record has not been released. The precise contents of the insurance policy, the amount, the date it was taken out, the full name of the beneficiary, have not been publicly confirmed in complete detail. What is confirmed is that the policy exists. What is confirmed is that it is part of the investigative file. What is confirmed is that it was part of what the Royal Bahamas Police Force had in front of them when they decided 4 days after Lynette disappeared that they had enough. What remains is a woman who sold her house and quit her career and sailed to the Bahamas on a boat named Soulmate and wrote to a friend from her mother's house that she could not go back out there, and then went back, and then didn't come home. Lynette Hooker was 53 years old. She had a daughter who loved her, and a mother who kept a key under the mat, and a friend who kept her texts, and a life that, from the outside in the photographs and the captions and the YouTube thumbnails, looked like freedom. She is still out there, and she still hasn't come home. When the financial documents are released, and in a case of this profile, they will be, this channel will have them. Subscribe and turn on the bell. Not because the algorithm needs it, because Lynette Hooker deserves someone paying attention.